My name's Nat. This is Thursday, and every Thursday we deliver educational content around neurodiversity, how to better understand your brain. And today is not going to be any different. We are expanding upon last week where we looked at a range of autistic therapies which can support an individual throughout their life. When we say autistic therapies, we're not talking about getting rid of autism. Of course not. Autism is beautiful. It's a part of who we are. I'm autistic, by the way, so I can say that. But what we are saying is that the world is tough. If there are some things that can support us to navigate it, all the better. Last week, we looked at joint therapies, ones that you might do as a family unit. Today, we're going to look at ones that maybe be a bit more individualized, but of course, with the support strategy, more the merrier. Today, we are predominantly focusing on autism, though a lot of these type of therapies, if adapted correctly, can benefit all types of thinkers. Doesn't matter if you're neurodiverse or neurodiverse. But I would say, while a lot of the therapies we're talking about today aren't specially designed for autism, they do have to be tailored towards an autistic individual in order for them to get the most value out of them. Hopefully you'll see that trend as we go along today. Here's me. I've got a master's in neuroscience and neurodivergent, and I have been in many types of therapy as well as giving types of therapy. You are in very good hands, if I do say so myself. Last week, we looked at psychosocial therapies and how we can grow together as a collective unit. We looked at object relations, how relationships in the family impact each individual member. For instance, every single person is essential for a functioning family dynamics. We looked at the good enough mother. What is the absolute bare minimum you need to do in order to get a good child at the end of the day? We looked at more broadly autistic family therapies and understanding how communication is the primary challenge, not the autism. Structural therapies, where we again looked at the roles of the families and the boundaries of each individual person. That was last week. This week, we're going to look at behavioural models, how we learn in autism, psychology, on what type of studies have currently been done. We're going to look at a little bit of conditioning, which sounds like we're all, but is used for individuals as well. We're going to look at the famous Little Albert experience, which was cruel and awfully inhumane. We've got some cognitive models, third wave of CBT, a couple of DBTs, which is an expansion upon cognitive therapy treatment, Schema Therapy, as well as ACT. We've got a lot to crack through today. Some of these are going to be great for autism. Some of these, maybe not. But by understanding the principles of each of them, you might decide which one you feel might be the right avenue for you to learn more about and implement in your own day-to-day life and work. Let's kick off with a question. What is psychology? When we say psychology, is it the science of behavior or the science of the mind? It is both of them. Psychology, quite simply, is the science of behavior and mind. How does behavior affect our mind, and how does our mind affect behavior? In autism, psychology focuses on understanding unique ways of thinking, behaving, and managing emotions. Everything today is going to be put under the lens of autism. But as I did mention, a lot of this stuff wasn't created for autism. It has been tweaked in order to fit more aligned with how autistic brains work and function. We can't start off a psychology session without mentioning Mr. Watson. John B. Watson, the father of behavioral theory, he looked at how behaviors, including repeating actions, are learned from experiences in the environment. And this is quite interesting because we know psychology predominantly is observations rather than, say, neuroscience, which is actually looking inside the brain. There's this old thing, nature v nurture. Do we turn out the way we are because of our genetics, or do we turn out the way we are due to our experiences and environment? Most of the things we're going to be looking at today are related to environment factors. Autism is very much a genetic condition. So this is why having a multifaceted approach is beneficial. So keep that in mind. Moving on from Mr. Watson, how do reward or punishments shape behaviors in autistic children? Do you have any examples of when you have rewarded an individual who may be autistic to good favor? Or are there times when you have punished them which have actually made it a lot worse? I'm not advocating here for showering them in sweets or smacking them, by no means. But reward and punishment, even if it's a praise or a telling off, does work. But does it work favorably? Is there a barrier between what is too much and what is not enough? You don't want to reward them so much that they become spoiled, but don't punish them so much that they become psychologically distressed. Some of the key pioneers of this area of reward and punishment has been Watson, who we just mentioned, Pavlov, who you'll remember about him and his dog and that salivating dog, and that's how he's trained the dog to do what it wants, and then Skinner as well. All right, usually dessert/cake for reward time out of not being so. Yeah. Teachers get upset at clarifying questions and punish for rudeness, which understanding the communications on entirely. Because if we punish someone when they are doing something which they do not deem to be naughty, then there's this feeling of injustice and then this rebellion towards that system. If we put this under the lens of education, you are a autistic student, right? You try to communicate with your teacher. You don't understand something, so you ask a question. Your teacher thinks you're being cheeky or misbehaving. They punish you. You don't feel like asking questions. And next time you are unaware, you stay quiet. You make more mistakes in the future. With that in mind, punishment needs to be understood on both sides. If you steal something and you get punished, you probably would accept it. You know what? I know I did bad. But if you did something and you got accused of stealing when actually you didn't, then you'll be reluctant to engage with that shop again. You can see how there's nothing wrong with praising and punishing within limits, but it has to be justified on both parties. You can't just punish a child if they don't understand why they are being punished. Rewards to help reinforce positive behavior and build trust. Yep, rewards are really useful. You don't want to overdo it because every time you reward someone, that reward loses a slight bit of value. It's like, have a sweet. Next time, all right, and now I've got to give you 2 sweets, then 3 sweets, and you see how it spirals out of hand. Use them sparingly. We've got behaviors that don't meet environmental standards are often punished. Very true. If you're punished, are you likely to repeat that action? Probably not. And some of the things that we have been punished for are actually really positive qualities. We often talk about how neurodivergent people are innovators and creatives, but a lot of us are stamped out at a young age. Nathaniel, why are you drawing all over your textbook again? I guess it's not good to do drawing. Had that been nurtured, maybe I could have been a great artist today. Can lead to punishment behaviors based on neurotypical standards. We got parents, psychologically meanness lasts a lifetime. Yes, Gabby, you are right. That is something we will look at today. How early on in our developmental phase, it can scar us or make us for life. It's not a coincidence. Autism is a developmental delay in certain areas. The development process is when our minds are most malleable. And got to be careful. Every behavior has a reason. It needs to be looked at the cause of the behavior. Bingo. Rather than assume something is wrong, people are genuinely good human beings. Particularly children, we learn nastiness and ill intent. If there is a communication blockage early on, maybe we are the ones who need to understand it better rather than assume we are right, you are wrong. If a behavior is impulsive, then you don't always know why you have done it. True. But if you are then punished for that impulsive behavior, you might contain your impulsivity, which then means it has to go somewhere else. Energy is only transferred and never destroyed. We've got so many interesting ones. Rewards don't need to be tangible rewards, such as praise or recognition, marginal gains. Yes, it could be internal reward. Punishments for stinning without providing an alternative can lead to increased unhealthy masking. Yeah, it pretty much backs on what I just said, which is quite nice. If you block someone from doing something, that urge doesn't go away, but it has to come out in another way. Sometimes that other way might not be as productive. I want you to give an example of an experience causing an autistic person anxiety over something they were once fine with. Has there been a thing where maybe a child completely fine with eating broccoli, and then at one time you tell them off for not eating all their broccoli? Then they obtain a negative association with broccoli. Now, they never want to eat broccoli. We will talk about it momentarily, but there's the famous experiment with little Albert, little baby. He wasn't scared of anything. Yeah, it was pictures of a little bunny rabbit, a little kitten, no big deal. But then when they associated the kitten with loud bangs and claps, poor little Albert then grew an association that every time he sees the rabbit, where our intentions, while maybe good, can severely damage a person's psyche. When we think of phobias like scared of spiders or snakes, they weren't there. They were learned behaviors. There's this kid who I sometimes look after when I babysit, and they were not scared of spiders at all. But their older sister is terrified of spiders. And whenever there was a spider, she'd scream and shout. Now, the smaller girl, whenever she sees a spider, she screams and shouts because she has been conditioned to learn that spiders are bad. That wasn't initially inside her. We've got being in an environment they are used to, but then returning to that place when it is overcrowded. Absolutely, it changes that memory. Someone might be fine with going to a shopping centre, but they go on peak hours and now it's a horrible experience. Next time when it's not peak hours, they may not want to go. Having an interest in either being told off or being overwhelmed with other responsibilities, so they are afraid to go back to that interest. Yep. This is more of a fictional example. In short animation Lude, that's a great one by the way, Rennie plays with a dog barking on her phone. When she does it in the tunnel, the sound echoes and she gets overwhelmed. Yeah, exactly. Because that overwhelming experience was far greater, that's going to have more of an impact than when it doesn't have that overwhelming impact. Social events which are forced, feeling overwhelming, leading to avoidance of future events. Yeah, you're all picking up the right feed. Assisting an autistic individual do chores or tasks exactly the way you do instead of the way that works for them, even if it takes a little longer. A child coincidentally had a sickness and diarrhea bug, and the last thing she ate, which was she will not eat again. Yeah, so negative experience are bad. We can't stop negative experiences. That's beyond a lot of our control, but we can minimize them. When they do happen, we can explain to them, such as Rennie with the app. You know what? It's okay, Rennie. When you go in tunnels, echo happens, but we don't have to go through that tunnel again. We're only going to be in that tunnel for a very short while. Here is the classic Little Albert experiment. It was wrong, by the way, but it's done now. We don't actually know who Little Albert is, or at least we're not meant to. Little Albert, lovely baby, and it was completely fine with rabbits, scary masks, didn't bother it. Then what they did, every time they put a rabbit there, they'd play like loud sounds and bangs, and the baby associated that horrible sound, which it did not like, with the fluffy creature. When this beautiful little bunny hopped on the baby's lap, even though it was completely silent, the baby started to cry. We've got actual evidence which proves that this isn't just a theory, it's a thing. We can't do this experiment today, and thankfully so. My next question is, how can thoughts change an autistic person's response to a scary experience? Whether or not an experience is actually dangerous or damaging, if the individual believes it can be damaging, what is the impact? There's this famous image called the Tree of Images, and it's a picture of a pipe, right? But I think it's in French, and it says, "This is not a pipe." You see how this messes with the mind. It's a pipe. It's not a pipe. You don't know what to believe. Your thoughts don't align with what is actually true. If something changes, it can make you feel anxious because you feel unaware. I don't know if it is a pipe or not. Avoid similar situations. If I don't understand something, I might go out of my way to avoid it. I'm not going to play with bunny rabbits no more. Any of these, depending on the interpretation. That is true. None of you pick no changes. Sometimes negative experiences do not seep into our long-term memory. Sometimes they do. We don't always know why some things impact us and other times things do not. There might be times where you watched a horror movie, you've been completely fine. Another evening you watched it and it has severely affected you. It's not always clear why one thing could be damaging to your psyche and the other thing not. There are some things we are not aware of. This brings us on to the cognitive model. How we interpret events matter more than behavior. What the cognitive model suggests is that bad stuff happens. That's okay. The event itself isn't a big deal. If there's a loud, overly sensory information, noises, claps, not a big deal. What is a big deal is how we interpret it. How can we manipulate or manage our interpretations of events? April says, I learned about this pipe painting at college and university. When I was at college, I thought it was actually a pipe. When I was at uni, I was told that the French sentence was underneath the pipe because it's a painting of a pipe rather than a real pipe. Great, yeah. Thanks, April. That's exactly what it is. It distorts our reality of what things are actually. Because you're right, it's not a pipe. We've got our situation. Let's say a rabbit and loud noises. Then we have our automatic thoughts. Oh, that loud noise is very nice. Then we react, and we can either react emotionally with a behavior, or with a physical response. You can see here, the reaction is ultimately the most important thing which determines how we respond to something. We can't control the stimulus. We can't control automatic thoughts, even though some may say we may be able to influence it. Again, these are just schools of thoughts. You are welcome to agree or disagree. If fight or flight is activated, then rational thought is difficult. It is, yes. Some would say we do have some thought over it. For instance, we do have our natural born instincts. We are naturally born to fear tigers because they could eat us. But if we learn to be conditioned that tigers are not so bad, then we can adapt our fight or flight. It's all about sensory sensitivities. This is why you can't change the autism, but what you can do is help people manage the sensory sensitivities. When there is a crowded environment, it doesn't stop them from disliking it, but it can help them manage it and rationalize it and know that this isn't forever. This is a one-time thing. We are able to leave this situation. You can adapt fight or flight. Word describes how negative thoughts affect actions and body. I want you to think of some words here. When something negative happens to you, how does it affect your body? Yeah, we got tense, thoughts by the environment. You see how it all interconnects. Sweating, yep, sweating is a very physical reaction to a thought or feeling, sometimes. Increased heart rate, nausea, panic, depressed, makes my bone itch. Do you know, when we try to separate mental and physical health, we are not getting a complete picture. It is all connected. Our body uses mental processing in order to dictate our body's movements, and our body's movements can impact our mental health. Preparation often helps. Yep, absolutely. Brain fog. Yep. Increased heart rate. I think we can all agree here that it has a very distinct physical thing. Shaking, yep. It makes it a little bit easy to understand why autistic people might sin, move their body. It is a way of regulating overstimulation. Even if you're not autistic, we all do it, but it's the degree of what we do it in. When you are cold, your body might shake. When you are anxious, you might also shake. If you're autistic and overwhelmed, you may shake, but you also might do much bigger movements. Stimming is a completely natural reaction to stimuli. The reason it is more intense in those with autism is because those with autism experience sensations much more vividly. A way of explaining it is that maybe you're listening to music and it's a bit too loud. You don't like that, but to an autistic person, that same volume might be really loud. We don't know how other people interpret stimuli. We can only know that via communication. But not everyone has the advantage of being able to communicate how they experience the world effectively. It's like you trying to explain to me what red is. You can try your hardest to explain red, but I only really know what red is from my own side. This is why behavioural therapy was created. There's this thing called the hot cross bun, and it shows you how everything interplays and interconnects with each other. For instance, if you are stressed, we can't just focus on the emotions, how it made you feel. We must also think about the behaviour, how we respond. And the way we respond will also affect our bodily feeling, like shaking, how we feel. And then you've got the thoughts, what's going through our minds, everything go back and forth, through and down. Cognitive behavioural therapy is looking at everything from a much more three-dimensional perspective. Some of you might have heard of the vicious circle. If you're stressed, it gets you more stressed, and more stressed is very difficult once you're in a cycle. If you are feeling sad, you'll be thinking, oh, maybe I don't want to go out. Maybe you're going to stay in the house. Not going out the house makes your body lethargic and tired. Maybe you've had a loud trigger like an crowded environment. You're thinking, oh, I don't like this place. Your body goes stiffer. You decide to run away from the situation. You no longer ever want to attend that again. Every reaction, it is done for a reason. When an autistic person responds in a way that may seem atypical to you or odd or bizarre, it isn't random. Autistic actions are never random. They always interconnect, even if those connections may not always seem obvious to you or I. I'd be really curious to understand in a moment, those of you who have benefited or received CBT, and whether or not you have found it useful or not useful. On this one, I want you to think about what thoughts trigger negative feelings and actions in a tough situation for an autistic person. Again, this would be very relevant to all people, but in particular, those with autism typically experience the world a lot more vividly. We got, I can't handle this. People dislike me. I always mess up. I'm not enough. Everyone judges me. I'll never improve. No one understands. I don't fit in. You see, these negative words, they impact our emotional feelings. Though they are words, they also affect how we feel. If you say negative things, someone will have negative feelings, and those negative feelings will equal negative reactions. I find therapy very difficult and can't seem to grasp it. The therapists don't seem to understand neurodiversity. Yes, and that is why, while CBT is currently the best known therapy for mental health conditions, it doesn't work perfectly with autism. There's a disconnect in empathy. This is a good cycle to show you the vicious circle. You work too hard, so you don't perform as well. Then you get exhausted. Then you start feeling down. Then you give up. Then you're feeling guilty. Then you start working harder. Everything to get out of that cycle is really difficult. This is why therapy can be a really immersive tool, because it can help you identify this cycle. And when you are aware of something, you are much more able to make conscious decisions to navigate it. The cognitive model requires an activating event, as you said, the fight or flight. Then you've also got to have the belief. Let's say a scary rabbit. That is the activating event. Then you've got the belief. You have to believe that is a negative thing. Whether or not you believe it is negative is due to prior experiences. Then you've got the consequences, and that might be crying. And because you are crying, you are only strengthening that negative association with that kind little rabbit. In our brains, we've got neurons, and these are essentially the connections in our brain are all linked together. They are just like muscles. The more we use them, the stronger and the bigger they get. The more we associate a certain object or stimuli with a negative response or pain or suffering, that connection gets thicker and thicker. It's why it can become more difficult the older you get to adapt these thought processes. When you were younger, this is the time when ideally you need to have therapy and support and more one-to-one help. How can changing thoughts improve feelings and actions for an autistic person? Now we're trying to break that circle. What would be the biggest thing you think that would help change pre-understood thoughts and feelings? Remember how everything links together. You could say a bit of all of them, to be honest. But yeah, reducing social anxiety, boosting confidence, recruiting negative self-talk, handling change better. All of these things done in instrumental improvement can have a big impact. I'm not saying they're easy, but these are the things that you need to start handling. Imagine you built a really poor house and you could fix it bit by bit, but actually you might want to dismantle it and then rebuild it up again. Donna says CBT focuses mainly on thoughts, doesn't address emotions and somatic experiences. That is why our next therapies might be more beneficial. There are different versions of cognitive behavior therapy. We've got ones like, let's get the little spinny wheel up, and we can look at the different varieties. We've got Schema Therapy, we will talk a bit more about, which is an offshoot. We have acceptance and commitment therapy. Also have mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, behavioral activation. We've also got dialectical behavioral therapy. We have all of these offshoots because, as you rightly said, Donna, CBT doesn't mainly direct all the areas. As such, there are going to be some instances where it just doesn't work for people. Autism is one of those areas in my personal experience. Now I'm going to throw it back to you. Do you personally find CBT helpful if you have indeed had it? Particularly if you have autism. Was cognitive behavioral therapy helpful for you? Is cognitive therapy an effective for those with autism? Does with emotional control ease autistic stress? We've got a few different things here. We're essentially asking, does it actually work? April says she has never tried CBT. That's completely fine. I've tried it, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't find it helpful. But other people have. I'm not completely dismissing it, but what I would say is, if you are seeking a therapist, find one that has had experience with autistic individuals. Okay, so actually quite middle ground, and that's probably what we would expect, to be honest with you. It depends on the individual, absolutely. And this is why you've got to try around. I would really recommend that you stay open-minded, because if you start closing your mind off, saying it's not going to work for me, then it really isn't going to work for you. It can also really depend on the therapist. Yep, they are not all created equal. I found are most beneficial. Oh, tell us about that. Vicky says it also happens within the relationship. The workbook approach isn't enough on its own. Yeah, very true. I really like it when it's more collaborative. If it's purely on you to change everything, there's this feeling of it, particularly if the problem is communal rather than just inward facing. Anna says the NAS, National Autistic Society, has a very good guide on adapting CBT to autistic individuals. Very interesting. I definitely want to check that out because it's great that other people are being very mindful and aware that it isn't a complete connection. One of the offshoots, which I personally think is maybe better or more useful in certain scenarios, is the Dialectical Behavioural Therapy, or D. It's a type of CBT for managing strong emotions. Ultimately, what is autism? A lot of the reflections of autism is having strong emotional responses, stimming, overstimulation. This is being mindful. I'll be aware that we find certain things like loud noises distressful. The emotional regulation. When we are distressed, how do we manage our automatic responses? Then we've got distress tolerance. Are we able to adapt how much of a negative stimuli we can tolerate before it starts emotionally affecting how we regulate? Then we've got interpersonal effectiveness. All of these things done in tandem can have a positive result in those who have autism. That's why I personally think this is a better approach for those with autism, just because it aligns more closely with the most prominent deficits. Eye movement, desensitization, I'll have to look into that one more. Rewiring your thoughts, triggers, memories. Yeah. I was worried about starting EMDR. Why so? Looking a little bit more at BT, how does managing emotions change deep beliefs in autistic individuals? Now we are looking about how it could actually benefit us in the long term. We've got reducing anxiety. If you have a better understanding of how you feel, how you are going to feel, and your tolerance, I could see how that could help. Boost self-esteem, change negative thoughts, build on relationships, and cope with change. I would say all of those things would definitely be positively impacted by following this approach. Remember, it's not completely dissimilar from CBT. I feel that it expands upon it. Now we've got schema therapy. Schema is the thing that happens before a trigger. A trigger is something that might send you over the edge, but the schema is the initial thought. Schema therapy combines different therapies to change our helpful thought patterns in autistic individuals. We talked about a lot of different therapies here. And honestly, they all have their good points. But what Schema does is combine them together to hopefully create a more fleshed out therapy, which could be beneficial for those with autism. We have a few things that overlap, but we're very different. Part of Schema therapy is about nurturing the key essence of who we are. It's the core emotional needs. I think of the film Inside Out, how you've got your core emotions. I look at it a bit like a plant. You've got your nutrients, which is the key thing, and your water, your air, and your sunlight. If you have these key principles in place, the rest will follow and you will see personal growth, not too dissimilar like a plant. What do we have here? I want you to order in terms of what you think is the most important, from the most core, beneficial to the least. We got limit and self-control. Okay, freedom of expression. Yeah, being able to feel that you have autonomy. If you start boxing an autistic kid up and saying, no, that is going to make him feel stressed, claustrophobic, it's not going to work. Autonomy and competence. Yep, you've got to feel that you're able to do this yourself. This backs up the freedom of expression, secure attachment, limits and self-control, spontaneity and play. Essentially, what this is saying, from my perspective, is let kids be kids. Let them have fun. Let them hurt themselves. Let them be distraught if things happen naturally. Don't coddle them up in cotton wool. Don't try to dictate or manipulate their natural learning if you're able to do it. With plants, if we just leave them be, they will grow up completely fine. But if we start taking away key elements of development, that is when we start running into difficulties. Do let me know if you agree with or disagree with them, if there's any sort of adjustments or adaptations that you think would be more appropriate. Schema therapy can help autistic individuals with self-acceptance and positive actions. We can't stop being autistic, but what we can do is better understand our minds and understand where the problems lie. A lot of people would say it is a societal-based problem, not a condition-based problem. In this diagram here, you'll see there's a lot of overlap with previous theories we've looked at, such as like the Cross Bun, CBT. But here it is saying it is the schemas which is the most crucial part. You've got your early experiences, which shape what you find good, bad, negative, positive. You've got your underlying beliefs. If there is a trigger which interferes with these internal beliefs, that is when you'll have thoughts about it, emotional response, a behavior output, and it all interplays. This is actually saying before we get to that point of managing, let's go one step back. This will help increase an individual's own empathy and self-acceptance. This can reduce stress, change perspectives, encourage new actions, just to name a few. Still a relatively new thing, by the way, only in 2003. But there are many different offshoots of CBT. I think, honestly, there isn't a perfect approach. It's about finding the right one for you. I believe the last one we're going to look at is ACT. This is acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT can help autistic individuals accept their thoughts and feelings. We're not on about changing people, which some of these have been about changing your thoughts. It's about accepting it, understanding it, and rolling with it. It takes actions based on their values. You shouldn't have to change someone's core belief. You should be able to work with them. And when you work with the mind rather than against the mind, you have better mental outcomes. That is something we always say with autistic individuals. What can you do that works with your brain rather than against it? Or to put it another way, when you hear about that thing, or you shouldn't judge a fish by how it climbs a tree, that is what we shouldn't do. But why should we let the fish swim? Because we're allowing it to work with its own strengths and build upon its nature. With that in mind, can you avoid any of these things? We talked about at the beginning how negative experiences can essentially traumatize you for life. And it's very difficult to undismantle that trauma which you have picked up along the way. If that is the case, we should avoid all these negativity things, right? We should avoid pain. We should avoid death. We should avoid loss of a relationship. We should avoid crisis and failure. Guess what? You can't avoid any of them. You will have pain in your life. You will have death in your life. You will lose relationships at some point. You will fail. It isn't so much about avoiding these things, but being able to internalize them, understand them, and process them in an effective way. This is why the more modern theories are more problematic and more realistic. We can't hide people from these things. We can avoid them and mitigate them, but they are always going to happen. Understand them, yep. Acceptance and commitment therapy, it accepts emotions. When you are stressed or overwhelmed or overstimulated, that's okay. It's about accepting it. Yep, I know I get overwhelmed in crowded situations. Bright lights make me feel uneasy. I don't like being in big groups. It's okay, just accept it. Then it's about committing to values. Act according to what matters. What matters to me is that I get myself out of this environment. I'm going to go and find a quiet room, a place I can relax and decompress. Avoidance leads to distress. Pushing away thoughts increases suffering. If you say, you know what, I hate noisy environments, so I'm never going to go shopping. All that is doing is building up that negative pathways in your brain that makes that fear or that phobia grow in power. You still should push yourself and put yourself in those situations, but have a plan in how to act if it does get too overwhelming. This can stop people becoming recluse or stop people experimenting or pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. Then you've got flexibility, moving away rapid, rigid thinking. A lot of people with autism do struggle with repetitive behavior. This is because the brain likes consistency. It liked a certain desired outcome. Being able to challenge someone to try things that they're not familiar with can make a more flexible approach. This can be distressing. The way I always look at it is you've got your comfort zone where you feel nice and safe. Then you've got your danger zone, and that's where you're going to drown. But maybe go in the mid-ground, which is where it's deep water. You can still touch the ground, but you're slightly pushing yourself out your comfort zone. That is a circle of growth. And that is where we ideally want to be in most of the time. When we are trying to support someone, we can't go all guns blazing, because that is the equivalent of putting someone in the deep end and they drown. You want to make just tiny little increment improvements. In the example of a noisy environment, maybe go to a place which isn't as busy, or just before rush hour or just after rush hour, and start that exposure. Encourage flexibility. We got focus on meaning. Aim for a life of values, not just happiness. We can't expect to always be happy and understimulated. World is a noisy place. It is busy. There are going to be times which are distressing. But if we accept that, we can focus on what's important. I quite like acceptance and commitment theory, to be honest. It seems to make sense to me. And I think that's how, when you know a therapy is right for you, it just seems to make sense. If you're always staying in your comfort zone, it can start to shrink. That is also very true. You can see individuals who get that phobia over leaving the house. This is how it grows. You've always got to be pushing it. Our comfort zone is stretchy like our brains. I hope you're all finding this interesting. I want you to rank the therapies on what you think are the most effectiveness when it comes to supporting autistic individuals or yourself. Nice and simple, just put the ones at the top to what you think have the biggest impact. These aren't all of them. I can only include a selection, but just an idea to get a feel of the room. There isn't a definitive answer, by the way. It's very individual. I feel like I've influenced you all a little bit. But yeah, we've got ACT, encouraging acceptance of values, then Schema, then DBT, then cognitive. You'll start to see how we did start building them up in terms of ones which I think are more conventional and classic to maybe the more modern and progressive ones. Who knows what might come out in a few years? We'll never stop being autistic. We never should stop being autistic, but the world is only going to get more and more messy. There's a thing called entropy theory, which is that if you have a shoelace and you drop it on the floor, it is always going to get more messy and confusing than it was originally. If you've got a bit of paper and you tear it up, that paper is not going to get bigger again. It can only get smaller. Life will always get more messy. The only thing we can do is change how we process that, we understand that, and how we accept that. This is my personal order of what I find helpful. I do like ACT. The reason I have put it up higher is that I think it isn't as widely taught. DB is quite widely known. CBT can be useful with the right therapist. The others have their place. I think the classic behavioural models are really outdated. They're good to know about, but I wouldn't suggest them. If you don't understand yourself, how can you move forward? Very true. I think obviously living in a world which understands autism would be amazing, but that isn't happening anytime soon. We have to make sure that we are also our own self-advocates and we can explain it. Thank you, Nat. Learn different approaches. You are very welcome. If you did find this interesting and want to learn more, here are some lovely references looking at the history of therapies and how they might apply with a neurodivergent lens. If you are autistic in the UK, and in the workplace, there is support available to you. Do get support in the workplace if this is eligible to you. Though you can't get therapies through access to work, you can get coaching and mentoring, which can be very useful. Louise, what's my email? Don't you worry, I'll tell you in just a sec. If you want to view previous webinars, you can check out our YouTube channel. You can like and subscribe. If you want to contact me, here's my email. You're always welcome to reach out. You've got my LinkedIn there. We're done. Go off and enjoy your day, okay? Keep learning, okay? I'm here every single Thursday. I love having you. Such a lovely community. Thanks, everyone.